Welcome, family, to another edition of Stranger Thinking Media, where we bring you the gospel of Yahushua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, to address the problems of a modern world. So, stay tuned. We have an awesome show for you today.
Thank you, Rachel, for that introduction. The Matrix has you, Neo. Today's topic, let's red pill the term Christian, terms of concealment. Topics covered, disciples called Christians, Mithraism, the first Christians, Acts chapter 11 and verse 26. And the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. Disciples called Christians. Acts chapter 26 and verse 28. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. So let's look at that term. I mean, we throw it around like, like candy, like it's nothing. But where does this term come from? What is the actual translation? Well, if you just accurately translate it from Greek, the term is actually not Christian, but it says follower of Christ. So we're going to take a look at that, and it might seem like a very fine point or something very, small in the scheme of things without much meaning, but it does, because whenever terms take hold and start to obscure the actual message, it starts to become serious. So we throw around terms like Christian, not understanding what it means and where it comes from. So we're going to delve into that term in this video. And the intent of this video is not to, for instance, not to insult people or make people feel bad or get people triggered. That's not the intent. The intent is to accurately understand how did we get here? How did we get here? How did it start and how did we get here? And then, once you have that information, you can take it and, play around with it in your mind and make a decision as to how you want to view it. But the most important thing is knowledge, understanding how, when, why, right? So that's the intent of this video. First Peter in chapter 4 and verse 16. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. So it's mentioned again, the term Christian. But as I said before, it simply means follower of Christ and nothing more. When we say the term, we literally, I kind of call it witchcraft. It's like any term that gets, it's repeated over and over in your mind and in your head and in your ears, you eventually get a picture. And eventually you don't even question. And eventually it just is. And, and that's how things start to go wrong. You should always go back to the beginning. I call it go into Genesis mode, go back to the beginning to understand what's actually happening. How did we get here? That's all this is about. So in Galatians chapter 1 and verse 6, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. And remember, the term Christ is just a Grecian form of the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means Messiah, which simply means the anointed. And if you go back in the scriptures, this is off the subject a little bit, but I just want you to understand, anointed. King David was called the anointed, or Mashiach, Messiah. Solomon was called anointed, or Mashiach, Messiah. But then there's the Messiah, the Mashiach, HaMashiach. So just remember the term Mashiach or Messiah or Christ just means anointed one. And as we delve into this, you're going to see that even the Gentiles had their anointed ones. And remember, Christ is a Greek term. So you can start to figure this out that, yeah, the term Christ was applied to other people too. Just like in Hebrew, the term Messiah was also applied to guys like King David, the anointed, guys like Solomon, the anointed. Okay, so it's just a term that means the anointed, right? So when you get into Greek culture, into the Greek language, Christ is the word they used for the anointed. And so what we want to look at is, has this term been applied to anyone else in history, especially Greek and Roman history? I mean, we get the Hebrew history, but let's look at what would Greeks, who would they apply that term to? Greeks. They don't know anything necessarily about Hebrew culture, I mean, unless you're in close proximity. So did they have a Christ or a Messiah? So these are things we take for granted, and the answer is out there. Mithraism. Interesting term. What is Mithraism? Well, let's take a look. Mithraism, the worship of Mithra, the Iranian god of the sun, justice, contract, and war in pre-Zoroastrian Iran. So Zoroastrian, we've done videos on what that is. Ultimately, that religion comes out of Babylon. Like, what you're going to find is especially most of the bigger, longer lasting religions of the world somehow touch Babylon. They just do. That's why there's so many similarities. And a lot of atheists, a lot of scholars who are atheists, I'll say it that way, will use these things to say, see, the Bible is just a copycat. It's copying off of all these others. Instead of looking at it in the most obvious of senses, human beings have not always been scattered across the world. There was an epicenter. There was a ground zero. It all starts, as far as knowledge of the Most High, starts in Egypt. The children of Ham were very much in tune to the spiritual side of things. Now, they may have been misguided, but out of Egypt comes the first dispensation of Babylon under Nimrod, right? And it was there that all nations, all kindreds, all lineages, ethnicities gathered around Nimrod. And they all were taught the same thing. So you would expect, if there was an epicenter, if there was a ground zero for human culture, that as they spread across the globe, they would take bits and pieces of it, and some holding more closely to the original, some holding less closely to the original. And then when we talk about the children of Abraham, specifically mention the children of Israel, um, the Father in heaven, Father Yah, he says, this group belongs to me. Now, the other nations, the 70 nations, they split them up into 70 ethnicities, essentially, were given over to the 70 angels. We talked about that in previous videos. I won't go back into that. But the nation of Israel, Yah said, you angels have no authority over them. I will guide them directly. So they became his people, his peculiar people. So, just stay on track here. Let's stay on track. But let's look at what comes out of Babylon and gets spread abroad. And the Roman Empire becomes a vehicle for it because they are the power. They are the beast with the power to rule the world, especially in the last days. And so Father Yah uses them as a vehicle to also spread his gospel. So everything, his plan is working out. It's nothing that the Satans are winning. No, he's just letting this thing play out. He's like a scientist in a laboratory, and his experiment is right on cue. So Mithraism, the worship of Mithra, the Iranian god of the sun, justice, contract, and war in pre-Zoroastrian Iran, known as Mithras in the Roman Empire during the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. This deity was honored as the patron of loyalty to the emperor. After the acceptance of Christianity by the Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, Mithraism rapidly declined. Or did it? People, just because the name is removed, what you really need to do is go into Mithraism and see what they believed and what they did. And same with Zoroastrianism, of which Constantine's father was a Farsi, which is kind of a priestly role within Zoroastrianism. So you might think, here's a man who is now emperor, who grew up under a priest of Zoroastrianism, a Farsi, his father. Might he not have some preconceived notions? Whether his conversion was true or not, the point is he grew up under and schooled in Zoroastrianism, of which Mithraism is an offshoot. So keep that in mind. And, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but when they talk about church fathers and stuff like that, they throw that term around like it's nothing. What do you mean church fathers? You mean Hebrews? What does it say? Ye know not what you worship. We do know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews, not the Romans. So what are the Romans, the Council of Nicaea, the so-called church fathers? I'm not saying some of them weren't taught directly by the original disciples or apostles, but Paul said the mystery of iniquity doth already work. So his words were, even Peter addressed it, his words were being wrested, and Peter said they wrest Paul's words, which are hard to be understood, they wrested to their own destruction, not understanding what the man is trying to tell them, because he's hard to understand, because Paul was on another level. I mean, he was like a genius, I don't want to use that term, throw it out like that, but Paul was very learned, and he's talking to people who may have been more simplistic, and so they're trying to decipher what is it Paul is actually trying to tell us. And so all sorts of things come out of that. And of course, the Most High, in a weird sense, that was probably his intent. Like, some people will get it and some people won't. So Paul's terminology and the way he spoke was so complex that only the Spirit might be able to lead you to correctly understand what Paul was actually, saying. That's just me speculating on it, but that's you can kind of look at what ended up happening and realize, yeah, that's why we have so many different sects. Sects, S-E-C-T-S. Okay, get it right. So anyway, so the Roman Empire propagates all these different messages, all focused on the message of the gospel, but, it's like playing telephone. This group hears one thing, this group hears another thing, this group hears another thing. Everybody's deciphering it, how the Spirit is leading them to decipher it. Some people have their eyes wide open and get it immediately and understand it the way it was intended. And some people take the ball and run with it, especially if it becomes an advantage to take the ball and run with it in a certain direction. Anyway, did Mithraism actually decline, or were then just simply names changed? And you're going to find out. Yeah, let's look at what Mithraism taught and where it comes from, in relation to, let's say in this case, in relation to Egypt, which is the start of all of this stuff, basically. So mythology, Horus, he was, let's look how this thing plays out. Horus, and remember, don't look at it like, oh, the Bible's just a copycat. No, remember, everybody, the Most High taught Noah, just like he taught Adam. He taught him his precepts, right? So everybody would have an understanding of these precepts, whether they continued in it or, like the game telephone, if they looked at it and over time it starts changing depending on what locality you're in and what spirit ye are of, you can see how the message can kind of change. And with Ashatan, with the Satans out there, of course they're trying to sabotage it. And so there was one group of people who the Most High said, I'm going to build a hedge around this group, and I'm gonna make sure they have it right. And that would be the children of Israel. And whereas everybody else goes off on a tangent, but you can see the commonalities. So let's just look at this. We won't go through all of it, but Horus, he was born of a virgin on December 25th. Sounds familiar. Mithras, he was born of a virgin on December 25th. Right? This sounds familiar. So everybody's telling kind of the same story, but with their cultural spin on it. Horus, his birth was announced by a star in the east and was attended by 3 wise men. Mithras, he was considered a great traveling teacher and master. Horus, he was a child teacher in the temple and was baptized when he was 30 by Anu the baptizer. Mithras, he was buried in a tomb. Well, it says he had 12 disciples and he performed miracles. He was buried in a tomb, and after 3 days he rose. So, you see how all this stuff is paralleling. So let's go to Mithras, because that's our focus. And then you'll see his storyline, and it might make you nervous at first to say, hey, well, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is Mithras before Jesus? So did the Jesus story come out of the Mithras story? Or did they have a common origin where everybody on earth kind of understood what Yah was going to do, and so they have their version of the story? Rather than, oh, this group copied off of that group. That's just silly. No, everybody had a common understanding, and then everybody kind of went off on a tangent, except for one group who Yah said, they are mine inheritance. They belong to me, and not the 70 angels. So 70 angels had control of the 70 nations, except for this one little group that Yah says, the creator of heaven and earth says, they are mine inheritance. So again, if you look at Mithras, he was called a good shepherd, the way, the truth, and the light, the Redeemer, the Savior, the Messiah. So Mithras was also called Messiah or Christ, which means anointed. So in Greek, he would not be called Messiah, he would be called Christos, the anointed. And his followers would be called what? Christians. And this is long before Jesus, right? So that puts that shines a different light on that scripture that says they were first called Christians at Antioch, because Christians already existed, and Christians were the people who followed Mithras were called Christians, the followers of the Anointed One, the man God, the Son God, right? So this term had already existed. So the question is, well, what Christ are you referring to? Are you referring to the pagan Mithras? Or are you referring to the Hebrew Yahusha? You know, a lot of people say Jesus still, but which one are you referring to? And that's the deception. That's the game. So we're going to start to see where the two go off on tangents. There's Yahusha, the Hebrew Messiah, descended from King David, right? The line of David, the Israelite. And then there's Mithras, a Gentile. But yet he's called Christos, the Messiah, the anointed one. And he was called that long before Yahusha, Jesus, came on the scene. So let's dig a little further. You'll start to see that when they called Paul and his people Christians, it wasn't a name they made up. They were listening to what he said, and it sounded similar to stuff they already knew about. And they said, oh, he's one of those Christians. Okay, so let's continue. Mithra was called the mediator. Mithra was also the god of the sun, or the son of God. It's a play on words, isn't it? Helios Invictus or something like that. Of the shining light that beholds everything, and hence was invoked in oaths. The Greeks and Romans considered Mithra as a sun god. He was probably also the god of kings, the king of kings, lord of lords. So we're seeing a parallelism here. But remember, this is Gentile thinking, right? This is what the Gentiles already had been believing in a Christos. It wasn't new to them. So here again, Mithra, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, had 12 disciples, performed miracles, was dead for 3 days, resurrected. Sunday worship, Persia, 1200 BC, 1200 years before Christ. And these people were called Christos in Greece, in the Greek language, Christians. 1200 years before Christ, right? Before the Hebrew Christ. So that's where the atheists get off. Oh, see, you guys just copied. Well, you see my point here? You got to look at what you're doing. Do these atheists have a point? Do you worship on Sunday? Well, the followers of Mithras did. Do you observe Christmas on December 25th? Well, 1200 years before Jesus, the followers of Mithra celebrated the birthday of Mithra on December 25th. So you got to ask yourself, if you be a follower of the Hebrew Christ, the descendant of King David and King Solomon, you're not following Mithra, who celebrated Christmas. They didn't call it Christmas, but that's what it was. Who worshipped on Sunday. If you were doing those things, then the Christ that you are following is Mithra, a Gentile pagan Christos, Christ. You follow? Because these are the things he did, or his followers did. His Christos, his Christians, say he was born of a virgin. He was born on December 25th. He had 12 disciples. He performed miracles. He was dead for 3 days and resurrected. And his followers observe Sunday worship. So if you're doing those things, you're just following Mithraism, calling it Christianity, which it was called back then. The followers of the Anointed One, called Christians. So the term Christian was already in existence 1,200 years before Christ. Let that sink in. So this is the Gentile Messiah, Mithras. I'm trying to drive this home. So the Gentile Messiah, he was celebrated on December 25th, and his followers worship on Sunday. Okay, let's giddy up. I didn't want to beat a dead horse, but that's his Sol Invictus. But that's what it comes down to. You know, you got to look at what you're doing and realize that the original Christians, and I'm using that term, be careful, because there's two sides of this coin. There's the Gentile side, and then there's the Hebrew side. On the Gentile side, the pagan side, December 25th and Sunday. Just to name a few, right? But on the Hebrew side, where you have this man born of Miriam, a descendant of King David, and you follow? Descended from King David all the way back to Abraham, right? All the way back to Noah, all the way back to Adam. Those guys, when Paul is speaking, he says, I am an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin. He didn't throw away his heritage. He didn't throw away his lineage. He was proud of that. Peter, all those guys, they were Hebrews, specifically, predominantly of the line of Judah. Paul here saying, yeah, I'm a Judean. I mean, he wasn't actually born in Judea, but he's saying I'm a Jew, but really, to be more accurate, I am of the tribe of Benjamin, right? So all of these followers of Christ, they were all Israelites. So when you start talking about church fathers and stuff, if you're talking about Gentiles, hey, the followers of the Messiah, the descendant of King David, right? The follower of Yahweh Elohim, or Elohim, this Hebrew guy and his followers, they never called themselves Christians. So we're talking two different things here. We're talking apples to oranges and oranges to apples. We're talking two different things that somehow are being squished together as if it were one thing, and it never was. And what you're going to find out, because of the power of the Roman Empire, they squashed the Judeans. They squashed what they called was a sect of the Jews. They never looked at Yahusha, Jesus, if you want to use that name. You got to be careful, because that becomes a fine point too. So I'm going to refer to him by his Hebrew name, Yahusha, right? HaMashiach, the Messiah, the Hebrew Messiah, right? The son of Yahweh, the Most High in heaven. That one, not Mithraism Christ, and not Mithras and his followers, Christ, of the Greeks and Roman empires, who had power on earth to dictate how this thing was going to end up going. And if you look at what they did, specifically, Rome didn't stay in power because they were stupid. Rome knew, yeah, we have the military might, but we'd rather not use it if we don't have to. So, and if you look at how Rome was able to maintain power, usually they left the leadership of the various nations in power, but they told those leaders, you answer to us. We're not going to get involved in your day-to-day affairs. Just make sure you pay us your tax money and understand that we can conscript you and your people to war and blah, 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 blah. But for the most part, the Romans understood if you want to placate the rebellion, what you want to do is stay out of their business as much as possible. Let them think their leaders are their true leaders. You know, that's the face that they see every day. So, you know, in the case of the Judeans, you know, the Herods, even though the Herods were Idumeans, they were natural to that area. And so it wasn't like really some super foreigners, you know, that didn't kind of maybe look like us a little bit or act like us a little bit, whatever. So they left the Herodians, who were Idumeans, Edomites, in charge. Well, the heads of the Romans were also Edomites. They were cousins, which is why, if you know the whole story, which is why they would put the Herodians in power. They're all cousins. The Romans and the Herodians are cousins. So anyway, I'm not going to get too far off on a tangent. Galatians chapter 1, verse 7, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. Yeah. There's the gospel of the Hebrew Christ, or Hamashiach, Messiah. And then there's the gospel of the pagan Gentile Christ, Mithras, out of Zoroastrianism, out of Babylon. And remember, Satans are not stupid. They don't have to. There is an inherent thing in human beings to believe in a higher power. So what the Satans did not do is say, oh, there's no such thing as God. Yeah, you got a few knuckleheads running around talking about, oh, God does not exist. But Paul said, the fool says in his heart there is no God, because the creation around you itself shows his Godhead and power. So I was looking at, there was this scientist that said, I don't really want to say his name, but his last name kind of ends in like grass. I'll put it that way. He's a physicist. But anyway, he said, they asked him the question, do you believe in God? And he says, well, in all of my studies of the universe, like he's a sage or something, I have found no evidence of an intelligent God. And all I kept thinking was what Paul said. What do you mean you found no evidence? Look around you. There's nothing but evidence. There's this perfect clock-like, system in place from the macro to the micro that all works in unison in a perfect ballet. And you say you don't see any evidence of an intelligent creation. Wow. Like Paul said, only the fool has said in his heart there is no God, because the creation shows you his Godhead and his power. You can't make this up. You cannot look at this universe and think this is a dumb accident. Yeah, that's what the Satans would love you to believe. In fact, I think they would actually prefer you to believe that they did all this. I'm just saying, you got to be very blind to actually think that this just came about by accident. It's like the odds of it all coming about by accident are so astronomically impossible. And your general layman, it's not like my background isn't in physics. I understand physics, and I'm telling you, this These guys make a living and they're rich and they get all this notoriety by saying certain things. And yet they never come to an answer. And then when you look at when you do a little probability and statistics and permutations and combinations, and you realize this is too astronomical to come from absolutely nothing to this complex system, especially when you look at entropy, the law of randomness. Everything is going towards greater randomness or greater entropy. And he's a scientist, he should know that. So what they try to do now is invent some new fake rule saying, oh, even disorder is order. I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess you could say that. It's trying to rationalize the fact that everything around us is becoming more random, which insinuates if it's becoming more random, if you go far enough back in the time-space continuum or space-time continuum, it's like that's where they got the concept of the Big Bang. You can have an ordered, say an ordered ball of matter. And then if it exploded, it's becoming more random. The parts are spreading further and further apart. And those are breaking in parts. And the whole thing is becoming more chaotic. And that's what we observe in nature. And so if you observe, and they call it entropy, randomness, disorder, and everything is heading towards greater disorder, not the other way around. It's not becoming more orderly. Everything in the universe is becoming less orderly. So we call that entropy, greater entropy. Anyway, I'm get back on track. Sorry. So again, Galatians 1, verse 7, which is not another, meaning gospel, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of the Hebrew Christ. Let's clarify that. The Hebrew. I am an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin. He's talking about his Hebrew Christ, the descendant of David, not about Mithras. That's just common sense there, right? But some people just don't get it. And I'm not going to be mean, because Yah has the ability to blind even the most intelligent. So the first Christians, who were the first Christians? Mithra, the pagan Christ. Mithraism and Christianity. Mithras, the sun god. Not the son of God, but the sun god. This has always been, and when would you worship the sun god? You'd worship him on Sunday. So ask yourself, who are you worshiping? The scriptures are clear. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So that's what Yah's people are going to do, the ones who are going to keep his commandments, and that is a commandment, and it's not Sunday, but yet the followers of Mithras, the pagan Christ, would assemble and observe the day of the sun god. So we're putting a name to it, right? There's two Christs. It's either you're worshiping the Hebrew Christ, the son of David, or you're worshiping Mithras, the Zoroastrian Babylonian Christ. Which is it? Well, the Hebrew Christ says, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, which he did, right? The pagan Christ says, remember Sunday, keep it holy, and they do. So what Christ are you worshiping? Which anointed one are you worshiping? Come on, people. Don't fight me. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Is this making any sense to you? You got the pagan Christ and you have the Hebrew Christ. Choose one. Which one are you going to worship? So Mithraism, similarities to Christianity. Mithras referred to as the light of the world, Sol Invictus by the Romans, mediator between heaven and earth, born of a human virgin, birth celebrated on December 25th. See, people who are worshiping the pagan Gentile Christ, Christos, Messiah, celebrate his birthday on December 25th. Well, which one are you doing? I know I don't celebrate the Messiah's birth on December 25th. So I'm not down with worshiping Mithras, Christos. That's not my thing. I'm not doing that. Born in a cave, visited by wise men. See, what does it say in Babylon? How did they build the Tower of Babel? It said they used brick for stone and slime for mortar. Let's focus on the brick for stone part. What is a brick? It's a man-made stone. What is a regular stone? Is a God-made stone, right? So in building the world system, they created a man-made stone, and you're going to find out that the Antichrist is similar to that. The stone, that's the Hebrew Messiah Christ, right? The brick is the Gentile pagan Christ, who in the end becomes the Antichrist, right? As the ultimate culmination of it. So you got to understand where your belief system is leading you. You can worship the pagan, Mithraic, Gentile Christ, or the Hebrew Christ descendant of King David. And the Most High said unto David, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. But that was prophetic. The Father Yah was actually talking to Yahusha, his son. Sit thou on my right hand while I make thine enemies thy footstool, because that's yet to come. So it had a dualism, right? There's a dualism there. Celebrate God who valued self-control, renunciation, and asceticism in followers, belief in heaven, hell, and the day of judgment, ritualistic baptism in blood as purification, strong ethical code. So this Christos, Mithra, is very similar to the Hebrew. And of course, the Satan's, we're going to use brick for stone. It's going to serve the same purpose, but it's just a man-made stone. A brick is a man-made stone. That's the Babylonian concept. Parallel God's word, mimic it, keep people in babble, confusion, make it so close to the real thing that people can't really tell the difference and they get confused. And we'll make it, we'll propagate this one. We'll give it a lot of advertisement and, give them power on earth. And most of the people are going to follow this guy, the Gentile. I mean, let's face it, the Romans were in charge. So, and the Hebrews were beat down and it's getting enslaved and being pushed into Africa. So you got to think Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans, and they either killed you or they crucified you or they took you back to Rome and sold you on the slave market. So are you going to stick around the Roman Empire if you escape Jerusalem? Are you going to hang around Europe, or are you heading south or east? You're getting the heck out of there, because if you get caught, you're either going to get killed, crucified, or sold as a slave. It's just common sense. If you use your common sense, I'm not trying to be mean, but let's call it what it is. Mithraism, the differences with Christianity. Okay. Worship limited to men, initiated into mysteries. Women worshipped his mother. Mithraism became a military religion in Rome. It became that. The religion of kings. Promotion through ranks of ritual initiations. Yeah. I was thinking about back in the day when I was growing up, I went through confirmation. Communion and confirmation? And strong astrological influence. Animal sacrifices, bulls and birds. Okay. So there are some differences, but not as much as you might think. So if I were to just to clarify this whole thing, if I got down to it, to sum it up a little bit here, remember, we're talking Christos, meaning anointed one, and that's a Greek term, and it's applied to two different people. Scriptures, historical documents talks. Paul himself says, "The mystery of iniquity doth already work." Antichrist is already in the world. While he was preaching the gospel, people were coming behind him, twisting his words, twisting what he was teaching. And what was that guy, the coppersmith? He said he did him great damage, great harm. There were people sabotaging Paul as he was going. And mainly because they saw the belief in people, and people hungry to believe the story, that it increased not only the Hebrew Messiah, but it also increased the Gentile Messiah. So getting back to, they were called Christians first at Antioch. They didn't make up the term Christian there. When they heard Paul talk about the man God who was raised from the dead, who was born of a virgin, blah, 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 when they heard the whole thing, they said, oh, these people are Christians. Meaning, yeah, they'd heard this story before. It wasn't new to them. Oh, these people are Christians. But notice, none of them ever called themselves Christians. Because they also understood that there were Christians at that time. They did. But the pagans who heard them just lumped them in with the existing Christians. Oh, these people are Christians. They didn't make that term up. That was an existing term. You know, the followers of Christ. In their minds, it was Mithras. What Paul is having to do is kind of shift that. No. It's a descendant of David, the Hebrew. That's, we worship the true God, as Christ said. Mashiach said, we know, you don't know what you worship. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Gentiles? No, that's not what he said. For salvation is of the Greeks? Maybe the Romans. No, that's not what he said. For salvation is of the Jews. He was putting down, we are God's chosen people. We have been given the true oracles. Everything else out there is nonsense. You need to hear us, what we're telling you. But in this world system, might makes right. And because the children of Israel themselves weren't right, their message gets obscured. Remember, choose this day blessing and cursing. That choice was given to the Israelites early on in this old covenant, right? The old covenant says, if you follow my commandments, I will make you the head of all nations. If you don't, then you get cursed and you become the tail. You become the lowest nation on earth, and everybody's going to step on you and conspire against you and keep you down, keep you oppressed continually. You just look around the world and see who's continually oppressed. I should give you a hint. But here he is saying, we do have the oracles, meaning Christ says, we have the oracles. Salvation is of the Jews, specifically one Jew, but meaning himself. He's not a Roman. He's not a Greek. He is a Yahudi of the tribe of Yehuda, right? Of Israel, Jacob Israel, right? The son of Yitzhak, the son of Abraham, right? So what the Messiah, the true Hebrew Messiah, is saying is that, hey, no, we have the oracles. If you listen to us, we can get you back on track. But then he also says, the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, do as they say, but not as they do. So yeah, there's a problem in Israel. We know the truth. We know the oracles. We know how Yah is moving, but we ourselves are not moving correctly. And so the children of Israel, in this case the Judeans, find themselves under the foot because of their unbelief and their sins, they find themselves under the foot of the Roman beast, right? And so might makes right, and so that Roman beast is now taking this storyline and bending it to its will back to Mithras and Zoroastrianism. And that's what gets primarily propagated. And it's only fairly recently that people are actually seeking out the Hebrew Messiah, coming back to, what did he say? Salvation is of the Jews? Yep. Coming back to the true Hebrew Messiah, whose name is Yahusha. And if you were to spell it out in full, it'd be more like Yahweh Shah, right? So there's Yahweh, the Father in heaven, and then his son, Yahweh Shah, on earth, So anyways, you get the picture. Hopefully you get the picture a little bit, because I'm about to close this out. But understand there are two Christs. Pick one. One of them observes the Sabbath day from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. The other one, he propagates Sunday. His worshipers follow him on Sunday. But he is not the Son of God. He's not a descendant of the Hebrews. He is not the son of David. Right? And the Most High said that David's son would sit perpetually on the throne of his father David. And he's talking about Yahushua HaMashiach, the Hebrew Messiah, born of Miriam, right? There is a difference. It's not some fine point. The devil is subtle, and his little subtleties got you all confused. But in these last days, not only are the children of Israel waking up, because he said, in the land of your captivity, will you remember yourself? Yeah, it's starting, and the powers that be recognize it. Even though some of you may laugh at it and think it's silly or whatever, oh no, Satan has sped up his plans, knowing that the children of Israel are starting to remember, and knowledge is being increased. So now they're speeding up their plans, and you're going to see you've already seen madness start, and it's going to get worse, crazier. Yeah, wait till they go to these digital currencies. Yeah, you won't be able to buy or sell unless they allow you. Do away with cash, and then you're stuck in that system, with that system. So I'm just saying, for those who believe, Yah will make a way. So with that said, we'll kind of start to close this thing out. Galatians 1, verse 8, but though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, say I now again, if any man preach another gospel unto you than what ye have received, let him be accursed. No Mithraism here. Anyway, I love you all so much. Thank you so much for continually supporting my content. If you did enjoy this video, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe and turn on the notification bell. And share this with your friends and family. I'm sure they'd find it interesting as well. I'm very excited to continue this journey with you, and I thank you all for bringing certain stories to my attention. And shout out to the channel members. I very much appreciate you all for supporting me, and may everybody have a beautiful and blessed day who's in the body of Messiah, Yahusha HaMashiach. And I'll see you on the next video. Shalom.